How'd you feel about the team going into the game last night?
Well, I'm not going to lie to you. I expected them to win last night because that's how this team, has been. They lose to bad teams and they beat good teams, and it's kind of been their MO all year. It's why it's kind of hard to get too high or too low when they lose to a bad team, just because you know that they're going to have that response next time out there. And Toronto's a good matchup for them. Toronto still doesn't play defense all that well. Their goaltending is still very leaky. So as long as you keep Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner in check, like you're going to win that game more often than not. And so, I thought that last night, I don't know if I expected 3-0 out of the gate, but I had a feeling they were going to bounce back because this team, you sort of alluded to it there. They're hard to read, but one thing's for sure is that they tend to play well against playoff opponents. I think they're well over 500 now against teams that are currently in the playoff structure in the East and the West.
Do you have any confidence that this team can win a playoff series as constituted?
Yeah, well, why not? I mean, you look at this team right now, and they need their goaltending to be what it's been for the majority of the season, of course. But when you look at the star power they have with David Pastrnak, and if he can make guys around him better, like he did last night, for 2 weeks, yeah, you win a series, So they're like any team in the sense that they need some good fortune. They need some goaltending. And, if their star players show up, they should win a series. So I think they're aided, John, by the fact that there's really not like a super powerhouse in the Eastern Conference. Like, if you want to say the Panthers because they're playing so well, sure. But the Bruins have beat the Panthers both times they played this year. So they play well against them, too, right now. So I think they have a chance, but like any team, they need something to go their way. I don't think that any team can win based on skill and skill alone. You need some bounces and some breaks to go your way, as we all learned last year, I think.
Last week or two, they've been inconsistent on a lot of levels defensively, and then you've seen extended, prolonged slumps from Zacha and DeBrusk until last night. With the trade deadline coming up in 3 days, what does this team prioritize acquiring?
Yeah, I think probably I would imagine if they have to pick just one thing, and they may very well have to pick just one thing, I think it would be a tone setter either on the back end or up front. There's a lot of chatter within their walls about being more physical, and that can be in a variety of ways. It doesn't just mean fighting. It means clearing out the net. It means scoring some greasier kind of goals by getting to the front of the net. I think that's been the big focus for this team right now. They don't like how they defend in their own zone late, from in tight. And so I think that's where, if they have one area they want to upgrade, I think maybe getting a little bit bigger, a little bit nastier on the back end, or up front, getting someone who can help you be the hammer and not the nail. So there's a few guys out there that fit that bill. Prices are going to be what the deadline prices always are. They're going to be a little, out there in terms of how expensive they are, which may hurt the Bruins. But I think that is probably going to be their focus. It's just getting a little bit bigger, a little bit meaner, and really finding players that can fit your identity, because this team is not going to win games 5-4 or even 4-3 for that matter. Most nights they're going to have to win 3-2, 2-1. And so you need to get guys that can help you close out games in that regard and just clear out, the front of your net and not let teams claw their way back into it with some, dirty goals of their own.
Yeah, and I think that's with an eye for the playoffs, too. You talk about getting a little bigger on the back end or even a little nastier up front with some kind of forward who can keep other teams honest when things tighten up and lock down in the playoffs, because that's where we've seen them get hurt before.
Wow, 100%. And sort of you look at the league trends, right? Like Colorado, every defenseman they had, with the exception of Cale Makar, was over 6 feet tall. And Cale Makar can get away with being 5'11" because he's a freak. You look at last year's Vegas, I think the shortest defenseman was 6'1", and so you look at
monsters.
The way the league is trending. The league is trending towards having just these big redwood tree defensemen back there that really eat up ice and don't allow you to kind of break through the interior. So I think that's where the Bruins want to land, is that they want to get bigger. And, it's interesting, right? You go back to 2020, they haven't drafted a defenseman under 6 feet tall. Like they haven't done it since 20. I think they had a 5'11" guy, I want to say 4 years ago, 5 years ago. But since then, it's been all 6'1" and higher, basically. So they're aware where that trend is going. Right now, they're trying to win with Matt Grzelcyk, who's 5'9", and Kevin Shattenkirk, who's listed at 6 feet. He's probably closer to 5'11", though. Like they are trying to win with an undersized unit, and that's kind of hard to do in this league as the trends are confirming. So I think that's just where they want to be. And this year is kind of a weird year because the hand is the hand they were dealt. Not a lot of cap space, a frozen trade market in the summer. So they kind of had to make do. But now, if there's wiggle room and if there are guys to be had, Marco Scandella in St. Louis, 6'3", Joel Edmondson in Washington, another big body. If those guys are out there and you can get them, you almost have to make that kind of move. You owe it to yourself to see if you can acquire that kind of player because that's what the playoffs are. And I think that's the spot they're in. It's just, how do you do it with no draft picks and very few prospects and no cap space? That's the hard part for the Bruins.
Hey, Ty, a lot of the fourth liners have played well, right? Boquist has done pretty well. Brazeau's made an impact. Richard, McLaughlin. You see all these guys kind of step right in. Will ownership and will Sweeney invest in this team? Do you think that they will? And just second part of that is, can you just talk about the dominance of David Pastrnak this season?
Oh, yeah. I mean, working backwards, without Pastrnak, they're a borderline lottery team, probably. You look at his scoring share, his point share. I mean, he's probably factored in close to 50% of their total offense, if I had to guess, maybe somewhere around 45% or so. Their fourth line is finally getting an identity. I think with Brazeau, with Boquist, and Loco finding his game here, they want a trio that instills anxiety, whether that's with speed or physicality or both, right? And I think you're seeing both right now when Boquist gets going and when Brazeau gets going. But I still think they could use another guy there that has a little bit more Lucic to his game. Brazeau is imposing. He's 6'5", 240. I heard that he dropped almost 40 pounds since the Bruins signed him, which is kind of crazy. He had to get lighter to skate at this level. And so but ultimately I think you want a guy who can maybe just be a bit more prickly, and can answer the bell. So guys like Frederick and McAvoy and Marchand don't have to every time there's a big hit. And so that's why I think the Bruins are going to lean that way. But that fourth line identity, I mean, that's been a problem. When they're not going, you kind of look at that fourth line and say, you wish you had a line like when you had Achari and Corrali, guys that you knew what you were getting. They were going to go out there, they were going to hit a bunch of guys, they were going to set the tone, maybe score a goal, and swing the game your way. When they're flat, their fourth line gives them almost nothing. And so they found something here a little bit with their fourth line, but I think internally they look at that and say that they could probably make an upgrade there from a consistency standpoint, I'd say.
Because the Bruins may or may not need another defenseman only for now and for the future, and you hear Hannifin's name tossed around a lot, but is there any way that the Bruins would consider trading a guy like Linus Ullmark to get them the defenseman that they need and then roll the dice with Swayman moving forward?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because I feel like that's a summertime trade. If you go 60-something games into a season, acknowledging that your goaltending is your backbone, right? And you guys had Jim Montgomery on, and he outright said, I'm going with the rotation in the playoffs. I find it very hard to imagine that you're going to rob yourself of that 3 days before the trade deadline. Like, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I think that the biggest thing about Jeremy Swayman, and I like Jeremy Swayman, but it's the same thing for Linus Ullmark too. Neither guy has really proven much of anything in the playoffs. They both need to prove something in the playoffs. And, if Swayman comes out and has a 901 again, or he loses games 1 and 2, and you got to go to Linus, I'd much rather go to Linus Ullmark than go to Brendan Bussey. And it's not a knock on Brendan Bussey, but I think both guys have something to prove. And I just struggle to see how you're going to make that trade happen and bring in talent that's going to be give you the same kind of value, in the aggregate than you would with this goaltending tandem if you roll them out, with the rotation in the playoffs, which they're going to do. So, Hannafin, the Flames have no need for Linus Ullmark so long as they have Jacob Markstrom.
Yeah.
And also Linus Ullmark has a 16-team no-trade list, which, by the way, drops down to 15 next year. It's not like it's going to get really better. There's only one more team that's getting wiped off the board there. So it would take a lot of moving parts that I don't know if they can do that right now. I think it's more likely you see, a defenseman who isn't Carlo Lindholm and McAvoy, along with DeBrusk, and maybe a future to bring in that kind of defenseman than Linus Ullmark.
Yeah.
I just don't see how that trade kind of works.
Well, I'm with you in that they kind of married themselves to that idea, and to change it now, even if they might like to, they're like, boy, I wish we really hadn't, talk so much about doing it this way, because wouldn't it be nice to just, because both of them are good, and being able to play the one, just play Swayman. Just play Swayman and deal Ullmark for one thing you need. But I think you're right, Ty. I think they kind of marry themselves to this idea, and to change the identity, if that in fact is their identity this late in the season, that'd be dangerous. I don't think they're going to.
Yeah, the other part of it too, though, is neither one of I thought up until last night, neither one of them has looked particularly great out of the All-Star break. Last night, Jeremy Swayman looked excellent, but can he do that again? Can he do that for 2 weeks in a row? Like, that's kind of always been the problem, is that you get a good start here, you get a good start there, but then there's a bad game, and then okay, now you're hoping you only get one leaky goal a game or one kind of softy per game. Like, they seem to feed off each other so well, right? And so I'm really reluctant. It's a summertime trade. I think it's going to happen this summer. But I kind of want to wait until the summer, because I want to see what they look like in the playoffs with the rotation, and if either one of them can take the net and run with it, honestly.
All right. I appreciate the time as always. Ty Anderson, read him at 985thesportshub.com. Thanks, Ty.
Thanks, Ty.
Anytime,
Ty.
guys.
All right.
See
we'll
ya.